Awesome. Well, I'll get started and give a little intro, and then if folks are coming in a little bit later, then they can still catch the full talk. Hey everybody, my name is Hannah Whitehead, and I'm an extension educator with the vegetable team at UMass Amherst. Welcome to Selling Local Flowers to Florists. Before I hand it over to Cara Schmidt, I want to quickly plug some upcoming events we have related to cut flowers. First, can everyone hear me all right? So it's
Yes.
funny on Zoom, you want to just make sure. July 2nd, we're co-hosting a farm walk at Clark Farm in Carlisle, Massachusetts, with eMass Craft. So that'll be coming in July. And then in late summer, we're going to do another farm walk focused on cut flowers in the Berkshires. And that one's still in process. And then in November, we're going to have another webinar with folks from the Connecticut and Maine flower collectives, as well as some folks starting to put together a flower collective here in Massachusetts. Um, so that'll be a webinar in early November, and all of those will be on our website, and they'll also be advertised through Vegetable Notes. So if you're not subscribed to Veg Notes, you can just message me or Sue Schweifley, who's also from the vegetable team here on the meeting. Send us a message with your email, and we'll get you on that list. Also, all of our past recordings from past Cut Flower webinars are on our YouTube channel on our website, and I can share that link with you if you're interested. Um, so the talk is going to be about 45 minutes with 15 minutes at the end for questions. And then at the very end, when you log out, you'll see an evaluation for the workshop. And if you would fill that out, that would be amazing. Because that helps us both have programming that's relevant to you and also report back on our grants and helps us get more funding to do more programs like this. So it's really helpful for us if you fill that out. It's very short. And then this talk is going to be recorded and we're going to post that to our YouTube channel as well. And then later today or tomorrow, I will email all of you with a link to the recording as well as Kara's slides. So you'll have all that information. Um, and then finally, questions. You could go ahead and put questions in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. We'll mostly do questions at the end. Um, so um, yeah, but feel free to put them in the chat whenever you think of them, and I'll just keep an eye on it and we'll ask Kara at the end of the talk. Um, And that's pretty much it. And let me introduce Cara Schmidt is our speaker. She is from Three Notch Florals, an event-based design, a floral design studio, which she started in 2017 in Brooklyn. She began sourcing locally grown flowers in 2019. In 2020, she and her husband moved to the Hudson Valley, and their focus became sourcing all locally grown flowers, or at least as much as possible. And so, welcome, Cara, and I
Thank you.
turn it over. Was
Okay.
that a question from someone? Someone raise a hand? Oh no.
Okay.
I was saying hi.
Great.
All right. I'm gonna start. Um, okay. Can you just give me a thumbs up if everyone can see the presentation? Okay, great. As Hannah said, I'm Cara, and today I'm going to talk to you about selling local flowers to florists specifically. I'm going to cover why you would even want to sell flowers to florists, what you might sell to them if I convince you to do such a thing, which florist would get which flowers, then practically how to go about selling those flowers to florists. At the end, I have a quick few thoughts on pricing from a florist perspective and dealing with feedback from your florist. And then finally, I have a little timeline. This is mostly for if you've never sold to a florist before, what you might do over the next 12 months to get that up and running. So first, why would you even want to sell to florists? Florists are a different market for sure, and I would be lying if I said there was like no difficulties in selling to florists. They know a lot about flowers, and so sometimes they can be really specific in a way that just like a general retail customer might never be. And so you might think like, it's wholesale pricing, it's lower pricing. Sometimes it can be more of a hassle, but I think there's some really good reasons to sell to florists. The first is I would argue you can actually make more money selling to florists. I know there's this assumption that it's more profitable to sell to an end consumer because that retail pricing is usually higher than wholesale pricing. But because florists know so much about flowers and they see them all the time, they are always looking for specialty product. And your florists are going to be willing to pay premium prices for that specialty product in a way that an end consumer might not be interested in. So, at like a farmer's market or a flower stand, you might have somebody who will buy like pink ranunculus and pay 10, 15, maybe even $20 a bunch for them, but they're not going to pay $35 a bunch for Cloney Hanoi blush ranunculus because that just doesn't make sense to them. Like they don't see the value difference, but your florist does see the value difference and they are willing to pay those prices. So sometimes the input might be a little bit more for that specialty product, but I also think that like the value at the end can be more too to your florist. And then the other way I think you can make more money is a bit more of like an efficiency argument in just that florists will buy in such bulk from you. So you may be able to move like hundreds of bunches through direct to consumer chains through like a farmer's market or a CSA or something else. But you often have to like put in the time for each one of those sales. Whereas a florist, if you've got like 5, 10 florists who buy from you, you just have to put in the time to make your availability list and release it. And then you might be able to sell the same amount of flowers in literally 5 minutes, which could leave you like a whole Saturday to just do something else. Like you could grow more flowers or you could spend time with your family and just like not grow flowers. Um, but I think that buying in bulk is like really advantageous. And then the second reason I think it's a good idea to sell to florists is at least I hope that we provide some sort of economic stability for farmers, just having this other sales chain. I think everyone is like nervous about what the next few years holds in people's budgets and the economy and how much discretionary budget there is for just like everyday flowers. And if it ends up being that people are buying fewer flowers, just like on the spur of the moment, you at least have florists with some built-in sales channels. Your retail florists are always going to have like holidays and birthdays and anniversaries, and your event florists are going to have connections with planners and venues. And, even if like the scale of that comes down, like I'm always going to have weddings. So I'm always going to need some flowers throughout wedding season. So I think, having that as a different sales chain, if other markets slow down, hopefully you can move your flowers through a florist wholesale chain. And then the last reason I think you should sell to florists is not a direct monetary benefit, but it is something I'm calling the kale effect. So stick with me on this metaphor. If you can remember pre-2010s when a kale was not trendy, there was just like people bought a lot less of it. There is this funny fact on the internet that before 2012, Pizza Hut was actually the largest purchaser of kale, and they just used it as garnish on the salad bar. They didn't even use it as food. But then I think we can remember in the 2010s, like kale Caesars became really trendy at restaurants, and like kale chips started showing up in grocery stores. And then food blogs would talk about like how to make that Caesar salad at home. And not only were, farms selling more kale to these restaurants or the chip makers, but they were also selling more kale to end consumers who just thought of kale as like a more desirable product. Um, and in this analogy, I think your florists are kind of like your restaurant or your food blogger. And through their website or their social media, they're taking the flowers you grow and sort of enhancing their value in the eye of like the whole market and the end consumer too. So flowers that people maybe have never seen before, they're introducing that to customers, or flowers that people might have thought of as like very traditional and kind of boring are now being used in new ways. I think the calla lily is like a great example of that. I see that everywhere on Instagram now, people doing really like architectural, unique installations with them. And this is a flower that I think a couple years ago you would have thought of as just like something in a hotel lobby. But now I'm seeing like really artistic things at weddings or in arrangements being done with them. And so in this sense, florists are kind of like your hype people. Um, and getting your flowers in their hands is, I know it's not like a super direct connection, but in the end, it's like hyping your product and showing like how valuable and beautiful it can be. So if I have convinced you to sell to florists, now I'm moving on to what is the biggest part of the presentation, which is what to actually sell them. And if there's anything that you can take home from this presentation, it would be this, to find your niche. So if you see someone growing a beautiful flower, I want your instant reaction not to be like, oh, that's so beautiful. I want to grow it too. I want your reaction to be, oh, that's so beautiful. That farmer's doing an incredible job. I'm going to do something else because there are so many things that aren't being grown. I'm going to talk about a bunch of things that I see from the Hudson Valley, but I bet if you talked to two or three florists in the area where you are, they would have 10 or 20 different things that they see that they want. Um, so there's a lot of gaps. There's still a lot of room in the market for people to grow things and be really successful and unique. And then before I get into what are some ideas of things that I see, I just want to throw out this idea that your niche could also be consistency. I see, um, there's like a huge emphasis on seasonality, which I love. But I see some flowers that are like real workhorses. They're like really good, really consistent flowers, and they'll come and be available for a couple of weeks, and then they won't be available again. And I think that you know, there's this idea that that was like the wholesale model that like, oh, we bring in the same flower every week from Colombia. And I am glad that we've gotten away from that. But I also think there's probably some farms that are set up to be able to, through succession planting or leaving something in the ground longer and getting multiple cuts off of it, or like growing it undercover to extend the season. I think there's some farms that could probably achieve this. And I think you'd find that florists would really love it, especially for some of the, maybe not the stars of the show, but like the backup flowers that are helping them fill out bouquets or helping them fill out weddings. So if there's something that you really love, like we have a farmer here in the Hudson Valley who loves growing those specialty phlox varieties, and she sows literally a dozen successions in a year. So she can have them every single week that she's offering flowers. And she's very successful doing that. I think that if you had something you could grow like that, that could be a niche as well. Okay. So now moving on more to like specific ideas. I've grouped the ideas of like gaps I see in the market into what element of an arrangement they are. And you might be thinking like, I don't care. I'm a farmer. I don't arrange flowers. I don't care what element of an arrangement they are. But I think you should care. And the reason is that um, when I am sourcing flowers, I usually am only able to source from, three, four, maybe five farms a week because I just don't have unlimited time to drive around, or I don't have like unlimited budget to pay for delivery from all these different farms. So if you are growing one thing that I really like, but nothing else, I'm far less likely to buy from you. So if you are like only growing dahlias, dahlias are a focal flower and they might be beautiful and I might really want to use it for this wedding. but I also need these other elements. And so maybe like you don't get the dahlia sale because I need to get these other elements from another farm. So I just don't add on that to my like flower pickup. So if you think about a design, an arrangement, they've got normally these kind of five elements: the focal flower, the main flower, the spike flower, which is usually like a tall, thin flower, texture, which is, anything that's got like little bits and pieces in it. And this arrangement, I used hydrangea. Detail flowers, which are kind of like the sprinkles on your cake. They're kind of like the little bits that sit on top and are very special. And then foliage. So if I'm sourcing for this arrangement and you're growing dahlias, but you're also growing foxglove and say like Queen Anne's lace, now it's much more attractive for me to come buy from you because I can satisfy these different elements in an arrangement and it's more efficient. Um, so that's why I introduced this concept of like the elements of the arrangement. And then I've got tons of ideas in all these different categories. Um, I'm not going to go through each one because there's a lot. And also, again, like your florist will probably have tons of different ideas. But I am going to touch on a few on these slides just to give you an idea of why something might currently be a gap in the market. Because I think different growing these like fits with different types of farms. So, for example, in focal flowers, if you think of the California poppies, which are in the bottom left, no one grows these in the Hudson Valley, which makes me very sad because I love them. But I think the reason no one grows them is that they're probably really fiddly to harvest. They don't have the strongest stems. They grow amongst a lot of foliage. So, if you have a big farm that uses mechanization or has a lot of employees that you have to teach how to harvest, this is probably just like too fiddly of a crop for a big farm. But if you're small, if you're farming on a third of an acre and it's mostly you doing the harvesting or you and another person that you've like trained really well, this could be a great crop for you because a larger farm is never going to be able to compete. Even if they could grow a million more of these poppies, they're never going to be able to harvest them because it's like a more difficult harvesting process. So sometimes I think flowers aren't grown because they're a little bit more difficult. And if that's something you can take on, you're probably going to find you're like one of the only people growing something like that. Um, and then on the next slide, I have ideas of like spike flowers that I see some of, but like all of these, I could definitely we could use more of in our market, and I imagine that's true in Massachusetts as well. Um, Sometimes it's just because they're very popular, but like for example, with stock, I think that's a good example of a flower that is grown a little bit, but I think it's like not very cool and trendy right now. And so it's just not grown as much. But there are beautiful new varieties of stock that have been bred in all these like antique shades. And this is one where, no one is growing the antique rose. And if they did, I think it would be really popular. And then in texture flower, same. Here's a bunch of ideas. I think a good example in here is that sometimes there's flowers that people don't think of as potential cut flowers, like the vetch or the red clover. We think of these as like stuff that just grows on the side of the road and not stuff we're going to intentionally plant. Um, but they actually they're great cut flowers. I love red clover vetch season. They are the same season that they are like end of May, beginning of June. Um, they are great cuts and I think there's a lot of stuff like this that we have thought of as either like a garden plant or just like a roadside plant, but they actually work really well. And so it can be helpful to like expand your idea in finding your niche to expand your idea of what could be a cut flower. And then this is the detail flower category. Especially your wedding and event florists love these flowers. They are impossible for a grocery store to stock. They're even hard for just like a retail florist who's using local flowers to stock. because they tend to be more delicate. So if you sell to wedding and event florists, these are the kind of things that they love to buy. And I think a good example here of like a category to think about is the geranium, which that's our native geranium. If you are interested in growing more natives, this is like a great element of design to grow natives for. Native flowers tend to be less blousy than something like a peony or a rose, but that doesn't mean that florists don't want them. Like lots of florists love these little detail flowers, and there's a lot of natives, that I think would fit like nicely into this category. And then finally, this whole category, foliage, this is like a gap in general. No one is growing enough foliage. Um, there is beautiful foliage being grown, but I would love to see like 10 times as much. Your florists, first of all, they think of foliage in the same way they think of flowers. They like to use a range of colors. They like to blend different tones. So just seeing more foliage that is like different, that's maybe some orangey browns or some like limey chartreuses or some like glaucous bluey gray tones. I mean, your florist will love that. And then also in the foliage world, on the other side of the spectrum with farms, if you're a huge farm or if you have a ton of land, um, this is a great area for you because people are always looking for large scale foliage, especially for events, for doing a wedding arch, for decorating the entrance to, a ceremony space or whatever. If you have acres and acres and say you can just grow, small trees or shrubs, or maybe you have like a forest that you can actively manage, I think you would find that if you can sell like 10 to 15-foot branches, you would not be able to get enough. People would buy them all. So there's a lot of gaps in foliage. I encourage everybody grow more foliage. We need foliage. We love it. Um, and then moving on from that, again, Hannah is going to circulate the slides, so that's why I'm not talking about every single flower. So moving on, I wanted to also talk about this idea of design style. And I think this is important for the same reason it's important that you understand the elements of design, because if you have a certain kind of florist that's coming to you with a certain style, it's helpful to know like what other things they're looking for so that you can sell them basically more stuff. So if like you have a traditional style florist coming to you, then that like they're also going to be interested in other sorts of products. So the main four styles, I think, are traditional, garden, modern, and meadow. And this is with the huge asterisk that, of course, there's like cross-pollination between these ideas, and there's lots of designers that will like straddle two different styles. But just very generally, sort of understanding the differences can be helpful in tailoring what you're growing to who is actually buying from you or who you want to sell to if you have something specific you want to grow. So with the traditional florist, I think that they are often looking for your kind of big name flowers that people have heard of, like your tulips, your hydrangeas, your roses. Um, and I often think they're doing either one or the other of color palettes. They're either doing like quite pale whites and blushes, or quite colorful, like mixed bright colors. So if this is like a florist that buys from you a lot, this is not the kind of florist who's going to buy a Roseanne Brown Lysianthus because their client base likes, maybe a more pastel, or like a brighter color palette versus your garden style florist or your garden style designer is going to eat up every single one of your Roseanne Brown Lysianthus, like every brown flower you can get them. So This kind of designer tends to use like very lush, petally, soft, blousy flowers in soft colors. So think like peach instead of orange. Or if they're using orange, they want that like brown flower to tone it down. And very like curly draping stems to get that organic look that people like. So if you find you have a lot of designers of this style buying from you, you're gonna want to think all those softer colors and less like brighter colors. And then next is a modern design style. And this is, very funky things, neon colors, liney colors, interesting shapes or interesting like graphic foliage. Um, if you are somebody who's got like a bog on your farm and you think that that is like a worthless space, it is not. You can grow pitcher plants. They are native and all the modern designers will love you. They will just eat that up. So if that's something that you're drawn to, either because it's like a good fit for your farm or because you just like this style of plant, then you know that this designer is also going to look for other funky things like your curly Q garlic scapes or your weird snake gourds or your amaranthus. Um, so then those are other like complementary products you could grow. And then lastly, I have a meadow style. This is what you think of as like your classic flower meadow, lots of texture, grasses, different foliage, lots of small wispy flowers, things that look very delicate. So if you've got a bunch of grasses, maybe also like plant a bunch of astrantia. I think that those appeal to the same design style. Um, okay, so that's a ton of ideas of like things that you might grow and niches that you might have in the market. Um, but not every flower is a good fit for every florist, even putting aside design style. And that's because there's two main types of florists, retail and event florists, and they have really different needs. So this might like be over explaining, but just to level set, a retail florist is somebody who's got a shop, they're open every week, they're doing a lot of like one-off arrangements. It can be great to sell to retail florists because they're going to offer you sales consistency week from week. Whereas an event florist is just buying when they have an event. Some event florists are doing events every weekend, but for some, this could be just once or twice a month. But the volume of sales that you can sell through an event florist is much larger. So, good reasons to have a bunch of event florists maybe on your roster as well, because they're going to move a lot of flowers for you. But they're not looking for the same thing. So, I put together this chart. Again, I'm not going to go through everything on the chart because I would keep you here all day and that would be too long to listen to me talk. But I'm just gonna briefly explain like how to read the chart and then go over one of these as an example. So things that are highlighted in bright yellow are most important to that type of florist. Things that are highlighted in the kind of mustardy tan color are important to that type of florist, but maybe not a deal breaker. And things that aren't highlighted are not going to be particularly important to that type of florist. So this doesn't mean like you can't sell a kind of flower. It just means you need to like tailor it to who it's a good fit for. So I'm going to give the example of stem length, which is the fourth category down. So your retail florist, this is really important to them. They need long stems. It's how they have like standard buckets for displaying flowers in their shops. If the flower stays in the shop for a while, it's going to get reprocessed over and over, so the stem will continue to get shorter. The stems need to still be long enough, even after reprocessing, that they can pick them up and make a hand-tied bouquet, which is like about the most popular thing a retail florist is going to put together. Um, so in order for a flower to be workable for them, it really needs to come in with like a 15 to 18-inch stem. So if you have a bunch of short flowers, you might be thinking, oh, now I can't sell those. That stinks. But your event florist, on the other hand, probably doesn't care about stem length. There are always things they can use short stems for. There are boutonnieres, there are bud vases, there's corsages, there's the flower crown for the bride's golden retriever. Like there are always things we can use short flowers for. Um, and so I'm happy to buy flowers that might only have like an 8-inch stem, even, might be not much taller than my phone. I just need to know that in advance, and then I'll plan for what I'm going to use them for. So this is an example of like, if you are growing something and you're getting really varied stem length, the short stems are not a waste. When you sell it, you just need to know you're selling it to the right kind of florist. Or if you don't know what kind of florist it is, you just need to specify in the product description. And then the right kind of florist will buy it. Like if you say in your product description, 10-inch stem length, the retail florist will know not to buy it, but your event florist will know that it'll work for them. So that's how to read the chart. There's a lot of thoughts in it. And I think if you kind of tailor product descriptions or tailor sales channels based on this, you'll be really successful. Okay. And now I'm going to talk like practically about how to actually sell the flowers to florists. You know, you've chosen what you want to sell, you like know who you're going to sell it to, but how do you do that? So first you need to find florists. If you don't have any that you're connected with now, Instagram is a great place to look. We have a really visual medium, so most florists are still quite active on Instagram despite our like feelings we might have about that platform. Um, Honestly, like hashtags, you know, like Cape Cod florist, Berkshire's florist, like these are going to find you local florists in your area in a way that even Google might not, because florists are more on Instagram than they are up with their SEO, to be honest. Um, Rooted is a great way to find florists if you don't want to network on social media, which I totally get. I will search on Rooted by radius around me. So anybody growing flowers within like a 50-mile radius of my studio is going to pop up when I search for flowers. And I don't have to have ever met them or even have heard of them before, and I can still buy flowers from them. And then lastly, the florist world is, you know, with the exception of maybe like Boston, which I'm sure is huge, the florist world is not that big. And I have a pretty good sense of a lot of the other florists in my area who like to buy local or who are interested in buying local. Um, and I am always, you know, like trying to connect friends and farms, and a lot of my colleagues are as well. Um, I think that you'll find that florists are really helpful here in helping you find other florists to sell to, because the florists who do buy local understand that, you know, it's not a given that local farms are going to exist. It's like a community that we have to continue to buy from and support. So if you do connect with one or two florists, they might be your best resource to find more. And then a quick note on like when to release availability. The probably the most important thing to know is when other people in your area are releasing their availability, because my budget per week is not unlimited. So if all of your colleagues are releasing their availability on Thursday and you release on Friday, I might have spent my budget on what I have to buy already. Even if you have like flowers I would prefer more. So it's good to try and figure out when others are doing it. I know, you know, like unless everyone coordinates, that might not be possible, but it's a good rule of thumb. And then the only strong rule I have is please don't release your availability on Saturday morning, because that is your retail florist's busiest day usually, and your event florist is often going to be on site setting up a wedding or setting up an event. And it is very hard to try and like be on our phones while we're running around working buying flowers for the following week. So whatever you do, whatever day you decide on, please just not Saturday mornings. Um, all right. So now, like, say you found florists, you know what you're doing. how do you like tell them about your flowers? So for direct sales to florists, I think there's basically three ways that I've seen people do it, which is an email list, a web store on their website, like a Shopify web store, or rooted. And there are pros and cons to each. I would say email list is by far my least favorite. I understand the pro is that it's probably the easiest and quickest to set up, but there's usually not photos for every product on the list, and it requires a lot more communication back and forth if something sells out or if you're replacing it, or I don't know, if you have to substitute. It can be a pain, especially if like you're not getting a response quickly from the florist or the florist isn't getting a response quickly from you. So definitely least favorite. Web stores, I have found these mostly to be great when farmers have set these up. There's always like a photo for everything they're selling. You can usually put in a nice description. So that's where you could say, like, this is a 10-inch stem length or this is an 18-inch stem length. Um, you can also set like the availability amount beforehand. So when I log on to your web store, I can see instantly if something's sold out, which is really helpful. So there's no back and forth about like, oh, sorry, this is gone. Do you want this instead? Um, the only real con of a web store that I've encountered is, at least of the farms that I've seen them set up, no one has been able to set one up where once you put flowers in your shopping basket, it reserves them. And so we hit this problem a lot where if I need a ton of white cosmos and I put 40 bunches in my basket and then I need some other things and I continue to shop at the store, by the time I check out, someone else might have bought some of those cosmos. And then when I go to check out, it says, oh, there's only 27 bunches left. And that can really stink if I needed 40 bunches. And so the workaround you get is florists putting in order after order after order because they're buying the flower they need the most, checking out, the flower they want the second most, checking out, and like so on. Which, from my perspective, is not that annoying, but I imagine for a farmer on the back end is a little bit annoying to have four orders from the same customer that you then need to put together on the back end. So I think that's the only real con for a web store. Um, I do also have this note about like if you join a collective and they use Rooted, it can be frustrating to have spent all this time on your web store just to then change platforms. I know that Massachusetts is still working on a collective. And I don't know if they're going to use rooted, but this happened to a lot of our farmers. So I have a note about that because I do think like that was a little bit of a frustration. People who invested a lot in their web store and then after a couple of years had to move platforms. And then speaking of rooted, that's our last one on here. You don't have to be in a collective to use rooted. You can just like use it to sell your flowers. They have fixed the basket problem, and I will say florists generally love this. It's great. You get 45 or 60 minutes, I think, to check out, but once you put something in your basket, it's instantly removed from availability, so no other florist can buy it. If you end up, putting it back, it instantly goes back. If you end up not checking out within the time, it instantly goes back. It's like really nice that Rooted is taking care of that on the back end. Um, the biggest con to Rooted is that it is not free. It costs money. I don't know if they like take a percentage or if it's like a flat fee, but it is a platform that you have to pay for. Um, some farms don't like that it limits you to one photo too. I will just say from a florist perspective, that does not bother me. If you have something that grows in a bunch of different colors, like you have some Icelandic poppies and it's a mixed bunch, or you're growing like queen lime zinnias, you can just put a picture of, you holding a bunch of 10, and then your florist is going to get the idea. So I don't actually think that's a huge negative. A quick note on other ways to sell. You can sell through a collective. Hopefully, this is going to be an option in Massachusetts in the next year or two. Hannah mentioned that some people sell through the Connecticut Flower Collective. The pros of this are someone else takes care of the administrative work for you, which is really nice. And the cons are that, collectives usually have some sort of fee associated with it. And then super quick note on wholesalers. I understand that some florists are like always going to use wholesalers. It's just the way they learned and they're going to keep doing it. And I think it's really important that those florists get local flowers too. So I totally understand moving flowers through wholesalers. My only note I wanted to make about this was if you start selling directly to florists and you get a bunch of florists that prioritize you, if you move to a wholesaler, the wholesaler will sometimes ask you to then prioritize them over your previously existing florist clients. And it can be like kind of touchy. It's like definitely something that's happened with some of our farms, and I don't have a solution for you. I'm just like flagging this as an issue. I wish I like had a rule that you could use, but that is something to think about. I think it's a good way to move flowers. I think it's a great way to reach florists who don't normally buy local. I think it does have like pitfalls. Okay, super quick note about photos. When you are loading up photos, no matter what platform you're using, it is so important for us to be able to see the true color of the flowers, which is very hard. So please try to take the picture in natural light, but not direct light. Like I shouldn't be able to see strong shadows in the photo. And try to use a neutral backdrop. It does not have to be a white wall. It could be like a wooden barn, but taking the photos out in the field is really not great. And please don't ever filter your photos, even if you think it makes the colors prettier. Here are two photos of the same bouquet, one from my studio and one that I got back from the photographer. And you may love the professional photographer's photo. You may think that is a prettier mix of colors, but it is not the true colors of the flowers. And when I go to buy them, I need to know that the orange is like actually a brighter orange and not like a really soft peachy pastel. So, um, really shoot for like the most accurate depiction of flower color as possible. Oh, sorry. One more note about selling to florists and how to do it. This is so important, but please have consistent procedures. I have been both the beneficiary and the person at disadvantage when a farm has decided to like sell early to certain florists. And if I could go back in time, I would give up the benefit every single time just to never be the person who's disadvantaged because something got like secretly sold before an availability list came out. Um, if you tell everyone you're releasing your availability at Friday at 10 a.m., then like please just do that. I think also it is fine if you have people who buy from you all the time and you want to make a special like VIP class for them. I actually think that's totally fine. That's really justifiable to me. But if you do that, I would say that just like release to everyone what the standards are to be a VIP. If that's like somebody spends five or $10,000 with you a year, or someone buys from you like X number of weeks, like whatever the standard is. Because I think you might find that florists will then like want to be on your VIP list and they'll be willing to like spend those amounts to get on it. And just them knowing, like if I buy from this person every week, I get the availability list on Thursday at 6 instead of Friday at 10. And then it's just fair for everyone. So just try to be consistent with that. Okay, almost done, I promise. I wanted to make a few notes on pricing, even though like your other fellow farmers are going to have way more advice on this. So these are just like from a florist perspective. The first note is to take into account the quality of like what you're offering. I think this is especially true if you are selling through a wholesaler or a collective where someone's going to see like literally the exact same flower coming from another farm or another grower. So if you're selling something and it's kind of like at the end of its season and it's not looking as great and someone else has that product coming on and it's fresh and it's bigger and there's more flowers per stem or whatever it is, just like take that into account. it doesn't have to be the same price every week if it's not the same value every week. And especially like as maybe you move into a collective sales, this becomes really obvious when you go to pick up and you see the same products right next to each other. So just wanted to like throw that out there. Um, Also something like again from our something that's happened in the Hudson Valley is I think it's important, not to undermine your market, especially if like you're just trying this out and you're not necessarily like determined to make a certain profit margin yet. You still don't want to undermine your market, but at the same time, like don't tell other people how to price. I only say this because this is something like I've seen in the Hudson Valley. So um, I know that's like hard to balance. Those are on opposite sides of the spectrum, but it is just something we all have to try and balance. Like florists do it too. We are like constantly trying not to undercut other people, but also like everybody's costs that go into something aren't the same. So I can't tell another florist, you have to charge X for a bridal bouquet. And then the last note on pricing from a florist perspective is if you sell direct to consumer, please remember that needs to be marked up because now you are competing with your florist, especially if it's like the identical product. If you sell a florist a peony for $3 a stem, and then you go to your farmer's market and you sell that peony for $3 a stem, that's really hard for your florist because they have to cover rent and employees and insurance. And so they had to mark that peony up to $9. And now they look like idiots for selling it for so much. So just keep that in mind if you do both sales channels. Okay. And then the last topic is dealing with feedback. You're always welcome to take this with a grain of salt because, like, I don't know the florist you're working with, but overall, if you have someone who buys from you like week after week, they really are like a partner in this local flower ecosystem. And I think that they understand that some weeks the flowers are going to be like so incredible and just blow them away. And some weeks they might be like a little underwhelming, but they're still fine and they're totally usable and it all is a wash and it like works out in the end. And if you're dealing with that kind of florist and they have feedback for you, it is really for only one of two reasons. Either the flower was like totally unusable for some reason. This could be something as simple as like you took a picture of it and the lighting was very weird and the flower is actually a very different color than what it looked like when you posted the photo. And maybe, the florist thought it was blush, but it was actually bright pink and it was like unusable for a wedding that only wanted whites and blush. Um, or it might sometimes be because we're seeing a similar issue over and over. And this could be something like you're harvesting too late and then the flower looks like beautiful in your cooler, but I get it back to my studio and they're just like failing within 24 to 48 hours. And that's just something maybe you're not seeing because in the cooler it's totally fine. So if a florist raises feedback, especially if you think they're doing it in good faith and it's someone that you sell to a lot, it's really because like we see something that we think is going to make your sales better. I know feedback is so uncomfortable. When people give me feedback on weddings, I get like so nervous that they hated their flowers. So I totally get it. But I think for the most part, you're gonna find a florist is actually there to like give you helpful feedback. So I just wanted to note that. And then my last slide here is just a little timeline. If you've like never sold to a florist before, steps that I think will put you in a really good position over the next year. So thinking about what your niche is going to be, say it's like the pitcher plant, then you can start connecting to like cool, funky, modern florists on Instagram. And then in the spring and summer, you can start growing whatever it is you've chosen. And then work on things that I think are sometimes like not top of mind when like you first choose something to grow. You're like just so excited to grow it, but practice harvesting, practice storing it, practice like forecasting for the following week. How long does it take, the next round of flowers to bloom? This is a great time if you're not selling it yet to like photograph it really nicely and just get those photos lined up and then you never have to photograph it again. Get your selling system lined up. And then by like summer to fall, if you're feeling really good about all that, try it out with a smaller group of florists first, maybe like 3 to 5, get some feedback over the winter. And then I think if you did that, like by 2026, you'd be in a great position to just expand and go crazy. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening. I'm gonna
Awesome. Thanks, Karen.
stop sharing the presentation.
Awesome. That was great. I have some questions that people have put in the chat, and then if folks have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them. We'll kind of go down the list. Let's see. Two people actually asked what the best day is to release availability lists.
Um, I would say like Wednesday or Thursday are probably like your dream for a florist. I have seen a ton of people release them on Friday. So this would be like, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to pick up the following Wednesday or Thursday. So you're talking about a week or a little less in advance. I've seen a lot of people do it on Friday, and that is fine too. Just I like really would stay away from Saturday if you can. Some of this is also going to depend on like how well you've trained your florist, to be honest. There is, for florists who haven't bought local before, there is a bit of an adjustment period. And as a farm, you do have to kind of like work on training them to know that it's okay to wait that long to order their flowers. Like it can be very scary to have a $20,000-$30,000 floral budget for a wedding and literally buy none of the flowers until the week before. But hopefully over time your florist will learn that like the volume is going to be there, the product is going to be there. So it's going to be a little bit of a back and forth between them. I think, shoot for Thursday or Friday. If you can get to the point where you can do it a week in advance, that's amazing. That's golden. I think that's about as best as you're going to do.
Awesome. Thanks. Let's see. Okay. Oh, and someone's asking about rooted. Is rooted available for florists to purchase all week? In other words, I cut on certain days of the week and want florists to understand that I will deliver on certain days. I do not want a constant drip of incoming purchases and constant.
Yeah. You can set it up on Rooted. So our farms and our collective, when you go to checkout, it'll say like, do you want to buy for a Wednesday or Thursday pickup? I think that's probably also true for delivery. I just generally don't get delivery. But you can definitely like select the days. So yes, if it's only like Wednesday or Thursday or only like you only want to deliver on Friday, you can set that.
Awesome. And then someone, Celine from the Hudson Valley, asks about your favorite way to work with farmers when it comes to buckets.
I always bring my own buckets to
Okay.
transfer. I think that is the question. I would not ever let a florist take your bucket. You're not going to get it back ever. I mean, maybe, but tell them to bring their own buckets. I think, if you get someone who shows up with no buckets, honestly, like tell them to go to the dollar store. I have done that before. I have like needed buckets. I didn't have enough. You can buy them for $1. They're great. I still have them. Don't make your florist bring their own buckets. Don't give them buckets.
Okay, great. Let me see. Also, folks, if it's your question, you're welcome to unmute and chime in if I'm not uh, explaining it properly. Let's see. So, someone is asking if you have an example of a web store or order forms to look at. They're
Uh,
only familiar with email lists and rooted.
if I have an example of what? Sorry.
An example of a web store or order forms, maybe I don't know if there's um, an example of what one of the web stores looks like. I don't know if,
The
hmm,
web stores,
yeah.
I don't. So the farms that I use, they're all like password protected so that
See.
non-florists can't just like go on and buy from them.
Yeah.
But they look just like a web store, like if you were going to buy from like a clothing brand or something.
Okay.
I think everyone that I know used Shopify, although that might not be 100% true, but I think mostly people
Okay.
just got like Shopify websites. It's usually just like a grid of photos, like you're on Amazon, and then you click on the product and you get more details and you can like put it in your cart.
Okay.
For email lists, if you wanted like a form on an email list, I have seen people do this a few different ways, but mostly, honestly, just like type it out with bullet points. And then sometimes they'll attach like some photos, but there's no like matching of photos to product. Sometimes people will like paste like an Excel spreadsheet into an email, so it's got like information in different columns, but I think that's why people like email lists in the beginning. It is like a really rough and ready. You can honestly just like write a literal list in the email, and then the florist will write you back and say, like, ideally, I want 20 bunches of your like little flower girl zinnia. And then you'll write back and be like, oh, sorry, there's only 10 left, or whatever. So the
Okay.
email is like exactly what you think. It's like a literal list and you just talk about it.
Okay, great. Um, Let me see. Someone asks, what's the best way for new farmers to introduce themselves and their product to you?
Oh, this is a good question. People have asked me before, like, should like farmers give free sample products or something? I don't think you need to do that. I would say the way I've had most farms like introduce themselves to me is through Instagram. They'll send me a DM and then I'll write back and say, like, okay, do you have an email list you can put me on, or do you have a web store? At like, just tell me the process to buy from you. Um, I think that's like most common. And then the second comment, most common, is through word of mouth, like other florist friends saying, I get the most incredible flocks from like this farm. You should like reach out and get on their email list. So you could like offer florist free product if you want, but I don't really actually think that's necessary. I think like a florist, if you have good photos of what you're growing and you have a ample description that says like the stage at which you're harvesting it, the stem length, I think florists are like happy to just try it out.
Great. Cool. Awesome. And
Okay, I
actually,
don't know.
sort of
Yeah, I don't
related
know if
question.
that's
No, that sounds great. Someone asks, what kinds of flowers are too many growers offer you? Anything overdone?
Oh, yes. For sure. I would say this is a particularly huge problem in the fall. The spring tends to be like so many different things are coming into season. I think the spring is like really interesting, and also there's just like so many new colors of ranunculus and butterfly ranunculus, and so it's not a real issue in the spring, but in the fall. It is very hard to put together a wedding when the only three things being sold are cosmos, zinnias, and dahlias. And that is like a real issue that a lot of florists face in the fall. I would love to see literally anything but those three flowers in the fall. There was one farmer here who sells a lot of flowering herbs in the fall, and like I would buy her out every week. And likewise, there was another farm that was selling foxglove in the fall. I think they had started them like very early in the season, maybe even around Christmas, so they could get like a first year bloom on the foxglove by the fall. And it was like the only spike flower. And I bought that every single week that I could get it. So like literally anything other than a dahlia, cosmo, or zinnia in the fall, with the exception of maybe like chocolate cosmos and cafe au lait dahlias, which we can never get enough of. But yeah, if you're like, oh, I don't want to do the dahlia digging process, great, skip it. Grow like anything else in the fall,
Oh,
for sure.
that's interesting. Great. That's helpful. Let's see. Um, Another question. I'd like to hear more about your decision to focus on locally grown flowers and what the benefits of the shift have been for you.
Oh, I feel like this is like a deep philosophical question. Um, I changed because I just learned more about the flower industry, basically. Like, I have always been pretty concerned about the environment and like supporting local communities. And my first couple of years of being a florist, I just really didn't understand like the world of flowers. I was still learning so much. And as I came to learn more, it just felt so disingenuous to be like, oh, I'm like plastic free in my personal life, but like I'm gonna buy these roses covered in pesticides from Colombia. So for me, it was a natural like part of my value system. Um, I would say the benefits are a lot. I mean, like, there's certainly like the downsides of you have to wait until the last minute to order. And, if somebody like buys all the white cosmos, it can be like very stressful. But the benefits are like, I've just learned so much about seasonality. And I am a better educator to my clients too because of it. So when someone comes and inquires, I can just tell them right away, like, that's not going to be doable. Um, if they go to a florist who's going to order from a wholesaler, then that florist might tell them, like, sure, you can have hydrangea in December, which, like, maybe that's possible to get, but it's not good for the world that we do that. So it's really like taught me a lot about what grows when, and also to know that like we had a really cold spring and now it's really hot. So like timing of things is weird. Cherry blossoms came out 2 weeks late, but then tulips are like right on track now because it's been 80 degrees. So you just like learn how the natural world actually affects your flowers, which I think is good. And you learn how to educate others on that. Um, I also like know who grows my flowers. Like I'm friends with lots of my farmers, and sometimes that means like I get a say in what they're going to grow the next year too. I can say like I loved this, or like I'm never gonna buy your celosia. I don't care what beautiful floret color comes out. I'm just like not gonna buy celosia. And they're like, okay, heard. I'm not gonna like grow any more celosia. Um, so that's like a real advantage too. But yeah, I think there's a lot. It also forces you to do something different. Before I bought local, I did weddings and I bought the same rose for every single wedding because it was like a beautiful creamy blush color. And I was like, it goes with everything. And now when I get garden roses, because there's a few farms that grow them, it's like such a treat. I'm like, oh my God, look at these incredible roses. It's not like here's the same white rose at every wedding. So nothing looks the same too. Things might look similar, but they're always going to look a little different. And I'm always like pushed to think if I can't get the thing I thought I was going to use, what can I use instead?
Awesome. Thanks. So I think so we're at 1 o'clock. There's a couple more I could ask. There's two final questions.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry
but
to
if
keep everyone over. I know I like babbled on a lot.
no, it was great. It was great. And we're right on time too. It usually goes over a little bit. So why don't actually I'm gonna pick one of these and we'll do a final question. And then if it's okay with you, Kara, I can share your contact information as well in the follow-up email if you don't
Yeah,
mind
for
reaching out
sure.
questions, but that's up to you.
Yeah, no,
They can
totally.
also reach out to me too, and I can pass along questions as well. So the final question is whether you recommend joining a collective or building, or or do you prefer when, or do you recommend building individual relationships with florists? Let's see.
I
The
definitely
florist
recommend
preferring the
joining.
collective route for buying is the question.
I definitely recommend joining a collective. I probably had, maybe half a dozen to 10 flower farms I bought from regularly before the collective. But in any one week, I was only buying from like three, maybe four of those farms. If I was buying from more than four farms, it was like a real stressor on me. And so that was a lot of flowers that other people were growing that I would have really liked to have, but I just like couldn't make it work. And now with the collective, I think there's, maybe a dozen or so farms in our collective. Like I can buy from every single one of them every week. It helps me buy from more farms. I think it also helps people be able to buy the flowers that they actually really need. There was definitely a problem before the collective, and not to say this isn't still a problem somewhat, but of the first availability list comes out and your event is next week, or like Mother's Day is next week, or whatever it is, and you need a lot of flowers for it, and you don't know what the following availability lists are going to hold. So sometimes, oh, let's be honest, a lot of times, like the first availability list that comes out, you're going to buy a lot off of it, even if it's not exactly what you want, because you're just like worried that you're going to have enough flowers for whatever you need it for. And then the like fifth availability list that comes out might have the literal perfect flower you need, but you've already spent your whole budget. And also, the person, there might be somebody else out there who you bought their flower from that first availability list and you didn't even want that flower and they really wanted it, but now they can't get it because you bought it. Like the whole thing is just really inefficient, and a collective like eases that so much. So like all dozen farms are listing at the same time. And if I like have a wedding and it's pink flowers, but it's warm toned pinks, and like somebody releases a bunch of cool toned pinks, I now don't have to panic buy them. I can like see what I really want. And then that person who's got like a cool toned pink wedding can buy the flowers that they actually need. I mean, it is not free. I think that's like the biggest complaint I hear from our local farms is that every collective negotiates their own deal, but like you have to pay for the service. But I think like the people who invest in it are selling a lot more flowers now because, florists know that the volume is going to be there with like the amalgamation of farms, and they also know that like they're going to see it all at once, so they know they can like get the right mix of things. And you have someone else running the collective who's like handling all this back and forth communication for you, and it like makes it work so much better. So if you have the option to join a collective, I think the first few years in the collective are like bumpy figuring things out, but like hands down, I definitely think it's worth it for the farms and for the florists. Like I pay to buy from our collective, and like I'm happy. I could still buy directly from the farms, but I'm happy to buy from the collective and pay the fee.
Awesome. Thanks. That's
Yeah,
helpful.
thanks everyone
All right.
for
Well, thank you so
joining.
much, Kara. That was great. And thanks everyone for joining us. Really interesting. And this has all been recorded. And so later today or tomorrow, I will send out the recording, um, as well as Kara's slides. Um, and yeah, I hope everyone can enjoy the beautiful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.